The difference between a character that your reader forgets about and a character that your reader cannot stop thinking about long after the book is finished comes down to one thing. It's not their backstory, it's not their dialogue, it's not even their arc, it's their psychology. Specifically, it's one single question that is buried so deep down that your character doesn't even know that they're asking it, but it drives everything. What they notice, what they're blind to, how they see everyone around them, and ultimately, what they do. Get this right and your readers won't just care about your character, they will feel like a part of them is living alongside them. I'm AAWatson. I've been writing fiction for 18 years, and what I'm going to tell you in this video isn't just what I've observed in great characters, it's also what I personally use myself to make my characters as good as I can possibly make them. Let's get into it. To create characters that the readers cannot help get emotionally involved in, it all hinges on one thing: the subconscious question. The question, as its name suggests, is something that the character is subconsciously asking. It's something deep down that they will never consciously think about, and you won't ever write it out on page. But it is the driving force behind everything. What the character says, what the character does, how they react to situations, how their emotions flare up, all of it. The question has to be constantly active from scene to scene, and it's constantly being tested, and sometimes it's confirmed and sometimes it's denied. The character will get different answers to the question throughout the book, but the definitive final answer, the resolution, does not happen until the end of their character arc. It has two main effects. The first effect is that it helps your character to feel completely unique. This is especially effective when you're writing multiple point of view characters in the same book, but even if it's one point of view, it will make that experience for the reader of reading through the character's point of view unique, because they're seeing them through the character's perception based on the question. The second effect is it makes sure that the character's internal state is constantly in flux. It's never just a steady line. There are always things going on that are affecting the character's internal state, and that is akin to how real people are. We as people always have questions about ourselves. Am I good enough? Is this the right thing to wear? Is this the right path in life? And not all questions are conscious. The psychological question does not have to be an insecurity. That can be one category of the type of question a character could have. An example of an insecurity-based psychological question, I'll use an example from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales. It's very clear and it's rather on the nose. In movies, it tends to be more on the nose than it does in books, because it's a different medium. In books, you have more time, you can be more subtle. Sometimes movies with their limited runtime have to make sure that the audience gets it, and often gets it quickly. But the question for Miles Morales in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is, am I able to be Spider-Man? Really, it's an insecurity-based question, and that is answered by the end of the film when he, the whole thing about anyone can wear the suit, and by the end he is secure in his belief that yes, he can be Spider-Man. This is actually touched again in the sequel, which is a great through line. Another example I'll use, not an insecurity-based question, is Coriolanus Snow in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Snow has some insecurities, yes, but it is not what defines his character. It's not am I good enough? The question is along the lines of how far do I need to go to get what I deserve? Because he feels he deserves certain things. He's working towards it and he feels he deserves things. And the question is more along the lines of how far do I need to go? The answer, very far. But you see, there are different ways to look at these questions. Some categories you can think of when thinking about your character is relational. For example, am I able to trust again? They can be existential. For example, does what I'm doing actually matter? Or it can be based on identity. Am I actually this type of person? In many great characters, the question runs from scene to scene and then eventually gets a definitive answer at the end of their character arc. So how do you actually develop this question, this psychological question? It's more than just thinking about, oh, how does this character think? No. You have to truly connect with the character and develop who they are at their core. That's why you have to know your characters really well, because once you decide this question, it will define who your character is and how they come across to the reader, as well as to the other characters in the story. To figure out the question, you're fundamentally asking two questions of yourself. You look at your character and go, what would this character need to know so that they could have true peace and security in this world? That's the first one. The second one is, what would this character have to know for them to be utterly and completely devastated to the point of no return? Once you can find out the answer, that is the intersection between those two questions, you have your psychological question. Keep in mind, go to the extreme on these. What would make them be at complete peace and what would utterly destroy them? If you have an answer, say there's something that your character would discover that would make them feel at peace, but if it was the opposite answer, it wouldn't actually devastate them, then no, that's not your one. You want something that is both sides of the coin, that if they get one answer to this question, it would make them be completely at peace, but if it's the opposite answer to the same question, it would be utterly devastating. That's what you're looking for. I'll give you an example from my own book that I'm writing right now. It's a fantasy book, and there's a character who is a hybrid of two different species. And this character's backstory is essentially that they grew up living in one species, one culture, but as they got older and the differences started to show more, they got kicked out. So they thought, I'll just go to the other species, my other half, and see if I can live with them. But because he was so different, they didn't accept him either. This all happens before the book. So during the book, the psychological question is there a place for me in this world? If they are able to find a place, which is all they want essentially, then it would make them feel completely at peace. While if it is truly the answer that they do not have a place in this world, it would devastate them. They have the trauma of being kicked out from their family. It would utterly devastate them. And the book really explores that. The plot doesn't really explore that, but the way the character reacts to the plot explores that, and that's what makes this such an effective writing technique. Once you have the question sorted, it can inform how they perceive things. That is specifically what point of view is. It's how the character perceives the world around them. And perception is truly what we are talking about here, because it's what creates a unique character. Perception has three separate categories, and the psychological question informs all of them. The first category is the character's sensitivity. It's what they notice, and specifically it's what they notice first or most often. Having the psychological question allows you to write so that the character acutely notices things that are directly related to the question. In the example from my own book, where the character's question is about acceptance and belonging, this character constantly notices and is sensitive to anything that seems or even is dressed up as either acceptance or rejection. Even if he's wrong, even if it has nothing to do with that, that's what he perceives, and therefore that informs how he reacts to certain situations. The second category of perception is the character's blind spot. It is what they fail to notice consistently because of its relation to the answer to the psychological question. The way this works is that deep down, the character wants a certain answer to the question. The character in my book wants to be accepted somewhere. The way you can use the blind spot is that a character might not actually perceive things that kind of lean towards the negative answer to the question, to the answer they do not want. It is how they subconsciously protect themselves. And again, we do this all the time. It's just bias. It's just writing bias into your character. This is just the technique of how to make your character feel as real as possible. There are certain things that we as people cannot or will not see because it would devastate us if we knew. And it's the same for your characters. A great example of this is Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones TV show and the Song of Ice and Fire book series. However, we don't have an ending for the book series, so I'll speak on the TV show. Daenerys' question would be something along the lines of, am I a just ruler, or am I like my horrible father? That is a through line through the whole TV show and the books, but again, I'm talking about the TV show just because we have an ending of it to make the point. Throughout the show, she becomes more like her father. She starts burning people when maybe burning people was not the best answer. For example, at least in the show, it's framed as her burning Sam's father and brother was probably too far, but she doesn't see it that way. Another is her getting jealous of of the love that is shown for Jon, and how the people who follow him truly love him, not just because he's their king, but because they respect him and believe he is a good ruler and they choose to follow him. She gets jealous of that. She starts getting extremely paranoid by the end that her rule is threatened, that Jon will try and take over the throne and things like that. And over time, she becomes more like her father, to the point where we have the ending that we have in King's Landing. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the ending of Game of Thrones, and I agree it was too rushed. I don't think the idea of the ending was necessarily bad. I just think execution was poor. And there are many things and many reasons why that happened. Excluding the execution, I'm talking about the bare bones of where her character arc ended. Throughout that whole series, she had a particular blind spot towards how she was acting, where she was going, where her mindset was going, until it exploded at the end and she went all the way bad. Everyone around her could see it, Tyrion, Varys, Jon, but she could not see it herself because that's where her blind spot was related to the psychological question. The reason being is that admitting that she was becoming more like her father would answer her question in the worst possible way. And that blind spot leads directly to her downfall. Again, ignore the execution issues. Even amongst all the things that they possibly could have done better, the base execution of the technique was there. Third category of perception is projection. It's the character assuming that other characters see the world the exact same way they see them. And again, this is something we as people do. You'll notice a through line in this video and in a lot of videos that I talk about my characters. I just talk about techniques that you can use to make your characters act like they're real people. Maybe a bit more extreme versions of real people sometimes, because the average person in a book might not be interesting, although it depends on the writer, I suppose. But characters will assume that others operate by the same internal logic that they do, even when it's obvious to everyone else that that is not the case. We are biased, we see things through our own lens. Multiple people can see the same thing happen and they will come out with different conclusions. That's just how we are, and that's how your character should be as well. We are shaped by our own beliefs, thoughts, and values, and your characters should be shaped by their own beliefs, thoughts, and values. And the psychological question is a great technique to get there. And the beauty in writing characters this way is you get to play with this in your writing, and this can lead to things that affect the plot in even ways you did not plan before writing. And for this, I want to give a real life example, because this happened to me the other day, where a friend and I went to a cafe. And we walk into the cafe and there were two people working behind the counter. There was a woman who was just making coffee, and then there was a guy who was working the till. And when we walked in, the woman just said immediately to us, "Do you want coffee?" And we were just like, "Oh, we're just thinking what we want. We don't know yet." So we were just standing there, you know, thinking. And then she said, "Anyone else want coffee?" And the woman from behind us said yes. And then she came forward and ordered her coffee. We eventually decided what we want. We ordered afterwards, and that was that. Later on, my friend told me that she didn't like that cafe. I said, "Oh, why?" And she said, "Well, when we walked in, I felt like the lady behind the counter was rushing us. She just asked us for coffee, then asked anyone else, and I just felt rushed and pressured, and I just wanted to take my time and order." And I thought that was interesting, because that was not at all the perception I got. I felt like they were just trying to be efficient, with the lady getting started on the coffees while the guy took the rest of the order and worked the till. That was my perception. I actually thought it was very efficient, and I liked the cafe, but my friend didn't. But the same exact thing happened. Why that difference in opinion? Because we both view things through a different lens. Now, were either of our perceptions objectively correct? No, maybe not. Who knows? No one will ever know. But what we were both doing was projecting our own beliefs onto the woman's actions. And this is what you can do in your story. You can use this to create drama and tension throughout your story, and it all starts with the psychological question. When you have a psychological question for one character and a different one for another and another, and they're all perceiving things that the other characters are doing through their own specific lens, that's when you get the character-based drama. And those are the three categories of perception that lead directly from knowing the psychological question. Just to recap everything, because I've spoken a lot in this video. Great characters, they are built from the inside out, starting with the psychological question. If you were to make this like a funnel, the psychological question at the top, then the perception with the 3 categories of sensitivity, blind spot, and projection, making the middle portion of the perception. But below the perception is the action. That's what we're talking about here, how your character fundamentally acts within the plot. This is how you create it. This is how you make it consistent and dramatic and tense. If you get the psychological question correct, then you don't have to force the character to act real. They will just be real. They just are. So try this. The next time you're creating a character, or even for a character you already have but haven't really gone through this, or you feel that they're a bit surface level, ask yourself, for this character, what would they need to know that would give them peace? And what would they need to know that would devastate them? Find the intersection between those two, get your question, and then go from there. AAWatson out.